History is often written in blood, but sometimes it is composed like a symphony. In the heart of the 18th century, one man defied every stereotype of royalty. He was a philosopher who corresponded with the greatest minds of the Enlightenment, a talented musician who composed over 100 sonatas, and yet he was the most feared military commander of his age. This is the story of Frederick II of Prussia, known to the world as Frederick the Great, a man who inherited a small, scattered kingdom and through sheer will and tactical genius forged it into a global superpower. Born in 1712, Frederick's life was a struggle for survival from the cradle. His father, King Frederick William I, was known as the Soldier King. He was a man obsessed with tall soldiers and rigid discipline. To him, Frederick's love for French poetry, the flute, and philosophy was a sign of weakness, an effeminate stain on the Hohenzollern bloodline. The psychological abuse was relentless. But the breaking point came in 1730. An 18-year-old Frederick, desperate for freedom, attempted to flee to England with his best friend, Hans Hermann von Katt. They were caught at the border. The king's punishment was monstrous. He forced Frederick to watch from his prison cell window as Katt was beheaded in the courtyard below. This trauma didn't break Frederick. It calcified him. He learned to wear a mask of obedience while his inner fire for greatness only grew colder and sharper. In 1740, the Soldier King died, and the world watched with curiosity. Would the new king be a soft poet? They soon had their answer. Frederick immediately abolished torture, granted freedom of the press, and welcomed religious minorities, famously stating, "All religions are equal and good, provided those who profess them are honest people." He transformed his court into a hub of the Enlightenment. He invited the famous philosopher Voltaire to live with him, engaging in late-night debates about the nature of power and morality. Yet even as he wrote his Anti-Machiavel, a book arguing that a king should be the first servant of his people, he was quietly preparing the finest army in Europe for a move that would shock the continent. Within months of his coronation, Frederick saw an opportunity. The Austrian emperor had died, leaving the throne to his daughter, Maria Theresa. Sensing perceived weakness, Frederick ignored treaties and invaded the rich province of Silesia. This wasn't just a border skirmish. It was the birth of a lifelong rivalry and the beginning of decades of war. At the Battle of Mollwitz, Frederick actually fled the field thinking he had lost, only for his highly trained infantry to win the day without him. He learned his lesson quickly. He would never leave his men again. From that moment on, he was a general king, living in tents, eating soldiers' rations, and commanding from the front lines. The year is 1756. Prussia is surrounded. France, Austria, and Russia, the three greatest powers in Europe, have united to destroy Frederick. This was the 7 Years' War, essentially the first global conflict. Frederick was outnumbered 3-1. It was here that his military genius became legendary. At the Battle of Leuthen, he executed the oblique order. While the Austrians expected a head-on attack, Frederick marched his army behind a line of hills, appearing suddenly on their flank. In just 3 hours, he crushed an army twice his size. Napoleon Bonaparte would later call this maneuver a masterpiece of movements, maneuver, and resolution. As the years passed, the dashing young king became Old Fritz. He was a solitary figure, often preferring the company of his greyhounds to humans, but his care for his people remained. To combat famine, he introduced the potato to Prussia. When the peasants refused to eat the dirty tubers, he planted a royal field and guarded it with soldiers, making the peasants think it was a royal delicacy worth stealing. It worked. Today, Germans still leave potatoes on his grave as a sign of gratitude. Frederick II died in 1786, sitting in his armchair at Sanssouci. He left behind a Prussia that was no longer a minor player, but the heart of what would eventually become the German Empire. He was a man of impossible contradictions, a hater of war who was a master of it, a man who sought peace in music but found fame in the thunder of cannons. Frederick the Great didn't just rule a country, he defined an era. He proved that a state could be built on both the strength of its bayonets and the freedom of its mind. As the lights go out in the halls of Sanssouci, his legacy remains, etched in the borders of Europe and the spirit of the Enlightenment.